Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have a post for the Anything Goes blog hop for the inspiration team for Brutus Monroe. And so I have pulled out the Alley Cat stamp, which is brand new, and I am going to ink that up with some Brutus Monroe embossing ink. But before I do that, I've grabbed my Strathmore 140 pound watercolor paper, and I'm going to use the smooth side, and I've covered that with my embossing bag, my magic embossing bag, which is a must if you do any embossing. And I am going to just stick that paper right down on top of the stamp, and then I am going to rub that very generously and with a good amount of pressure, and just to make sure that I have gotten that covered. So now I want to cover that with some Raven ultrafine embossing powder. And typically I wouldn't necessarily do such a large background stamp with a black embossing powder, but I had to. I really wanted to do some watercoloring, and I didn't want to have to wait a whole lot of time for things to dry. So I used embossing powder, and it ended up working out really nicely. That's how awesome that magic embossing bag is. I did have a little bit of spots where I pushed a little too hard, and so I'm just taking a clean brush and I'm wiping that embossing powder away. But other than that, it was pretty fantastic. So now I'm heating this with my heat tool, and I'm just going to hold that up to the light so I can see that it is smooth and melted, because it'll be shiny. So that embossing powder will go from a matte finish to a glossy finish, and then that is how you'll know that your embossing powder is good and melted. And once that's all done, I'm going to pull out my Arteza Real Brush markers. And I did a video last week on these, like it was last week, maybe it was a week and a half ago, just because this is the first time I've ever used them. And I've never had real brush markers, so I don't have the zigs. I didn't have these before, and so I didn't have anything to compare these to, but I have really been enjoying playing with them. So I wanted to do this big background with these, and I knew they worked pretty decently with the Strathmore. And so I've also pulled out some Arteza water brushes. So I've got two of them. I have a fine tip one, and I also have a medium tip one. And I zoomed in probably almost too far at some points, but I wanted you to be able to see what I'm coloring. So with these real brush markers, and I'm sure if you've ever used something like this before, you do want to work in sections, because the brush it dries, and then it becomes a little bit more difficult to manipulate that color around. But I noticed that by using the smooth side of this Strathmore watercolor paper, I am getting a wonderful blend. So I don't even think I got this good of a blend when I was experimenting the other day on the video, but that's, I think, because I had used the more textured side of the watercolor paper. So using this more smooth side, I'm getting a really good blend. And so I'm even getting a little bit more bold and venturing into bigger areas and letting that marker sit there for even a little bit longer before I start to blend, and I still don't have a problem. So these markers are a ton of fun. So I'm not going to show you all of the coloring, simply because it's a lot, and I use a lot of different markers, mostly because there's so many different spots, and I wanted this to be a fairly colorful scene. It's a building. You know, this is the Alley Cat stamp set, or not stamp set, but background stamp. So it's a 6x6 stamp, and there is a lot of ground to cover. So I could have done it in a more subdued color, like a brown, which would have been fine, but I wanted to make this bright and vibrant, so I'm coloring blue. I don't know that I've seen too many blue buildings out there, but wouldn't it be fun to live in one? But yeah, I'm just having fun coloring. I'm having fun experimenting with these markers, and I think these are something I'm going to end up using a lot, because they're just easy to use, they're fun to use, and yeah, so you'll see these a lot more. So I'll keep coloring with these markers, and I don't even know which blue this is, because like I said, I used a lot of colors out of that entire set, and I have the set of 48 is what I have. So as I said earlier, this stamp set is a part of a new release from Brutus Monroe, and I don't know if you caught any of the excitement during the Brutus Monroe new release, but there was a craftathon, a 24-hour craftathon on their Facebook page, and I got to do a live for the very first time ever, and let me tell you, I had the best time. Some of you might even be on here that watched that live, and if so, you're awesome, and I would love to do that again. So if you didn't catch the live, they are still on the Facebook page, so hop on Facebook, like the Brutus Monroe page, and you'll have access to all of those videos. They were a lot of fun. A bunch of the team got involved in that, and it was just great to be able to show off the new stamp sets and interact with all of the people. I didn't want my little kitties to get lost in the scene, so I do add a little bit of yellow around them. And I knew I was taking a risk with putting that yellow around that bottom one. I knew I could potentially make green, but look at how beautifully that blended out. These markers are so easy to use that, I mean, anybody, if you're just starting out, these are a great option, and the price point is wonderful as well. So I'm actually going to have a coupon code down in the description box below for 10% off your order from Arteza, if that is something that you are interested in checking out. But yeah, I really can't say enough about these markers. They're fun, they're easy, and mine are super juicy and easy to use. I told you I wanted this background to be vibrant, so I use oranges and yellows, and I end up using some pinks, and I use some browns. I go on to even use some grays, but it's nice to be able to just slap down some color and then drag it out with that water brush. I haven't had any problems with these water brushes, and I've been using them now for the past couple weeks, just trying to use them in as many projects as possible to make sure that I, really am knowing them and learning them pretty well. So I'll even use some grays. The 46, it may not sound like it's a bunch of colors, but there's quite a bit there. And so that's what the panel looks like all finished. And I love the shine of the embossing powder on there as well. Now, since I am pretty obsessed with the lunch bag cardstock from Brutus Monroe right now, we're going to go ahead and use that as our card base. And so I had cut that down to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and scored it at 5 1/2 inches to make a top folding A2 size card. I will trim down my panel just a little bit, so I trimmed down some on that bottom, and then I am going to end up trimming just a little bit off of that right side so that it'll be a little bit more centered on that lunch bag background. And then I couldn't decide between these Doodlebug sprinkles or these Doodlebug shape sprinkles that were in the tiny hearts. And I end up deciding on the little tiny hearts, and so I use these almost coral looking ones, and I put one above the top cat, and then I put one above the bottom cat, almost like he is serenading her, which is so sweet. And it didn't stand out enough for me, so I end up just using a little black pen to go around that heart. And then I decide I don't want a sentiment. I figure the panel itself speaks for itself. So this would make a great little note card for a loved one or your kid or whatever, just to let them know that you're thinking of them. I did put some Scotch foam tape all over the back of my panel, and then I am adhering that down to my card base, and that is going to finish off this card. So if you liked this card, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. Be sure to head back to my blog to check out the rest of what the team has to show you. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by.